This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy just hitting some of the high points from yesterday's Mueller hearing again. John Ratcliffe from Texas, who is a former prosecutor, you could tell he had one of the seminal moments, and it was very early on in the day with Bob Mueller, and just went right to the inverted standard with respect to burden of proof that's implicit in the Mueller report and how problematic that is.
Accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. Now, I read that correctly?
Yes.
All right. Now, your report, and today you said at all times the special counsel team operated under, was guided by, and followed Justice Department policies and principles. So which DOJ policy or principle sets forth a legal standard that an investigated person is not exonerated if their innocence from criminal conduct is not conclusively determined?
Can you repeat the last part of that question?
Yeah. Which DOJ policy or principle set forth a legal standard that an investigated person is not exonerated if their innocence from criminal conduct is not conclusively determined? Where does that language come from, Director? Where is the DOJ policy that says that? Let me make it easier.
Go ahead.
Can you give me an example other than Donald Trump where the Justice Department determined that an investigated person was not exonerated because their innocence was not conclusively determined?
I cannot, but this is a unique situation.
Okay, well, you can't. Time is short. I've got 5 minutes. Let's just leave it at you can't find it, because I'll tell you why. It doesn't exist. The special counsel's job, nowhere does it say that you were to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or that the special counsel report should determine whether or not to exonerate him. It's not in any of the documents. It's not in your appointment order. It's not in the special counsel regulations. It's not in the OLC opinions. It's not in the Justice Manual, and it's not in the principles of federal prosecution. Nowhere do those words appear together, because respectfully, Director, it was not the special counsel's job to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or to exonerate him, because the bedrock principle of our justice system is a presumption of innocence. It exists for everyone. Everyone is entitled to it. And it was written in violation of every DOJ principle about extra prosecutorial commentary. I agree with the chairman this morning when he said Donald Trump is not above the law. He's not. But he damn sure shouldn't be below the law, which is where Volume 2 of this report puts him.
Yeah, that was one of the signature lines of yesterday's 7 hours worth of hearings. He's not above the law. Okay, fine, true. He's not below the law either. And you're inverting the standards of proof. You're violating the strictures of the special counsel statute. The Volume 2 is in violation completely. And don't pretend, this was part of the other questioning, don't pretend that you didn't know that this report was going to be made public. I didn't know. I didn't know what. I was just going to file this confidential report to the Department of Justice. I had no idea what they were going to do with it. Oh, right. Like this report was ever not going to come out. Come on, Bob. You've been around D.C. for too long to not know better. So that false naivete was additionally insulting. But this is the point. Once he cleared Trump of criminal conspiracy with foreign nationals, Russians, it's over. Once he did that, it was over. And
but
even
they kept digging, and then they kept
I
getting
understand.
his close circle of friends, and then trying to go after his family.
And they identified moments where Trump was impetuous, arguably reckless, if those moments memorialized in the Mueller report would be to be taken at face value. But the problem is corrupt origins, illegitimate investigation, so the outcomes are going to be treated as illegitimate. People don't like standards being changed to get one person. And what this smacks of is maybe Bob Mueller started out with a pursuit of the truth wherever it may lead, but it was influenced by partisan hacks that were part of his team that were headhunting. And that's what comes across throughout his hearing and throughout the report. They were looking for a way to bootstrap an outcome they had predetermined. That's not fair. And people don't like unfairness, even particularly with respect to our justice system, even if the unfairness is in the direction of people they don't like. And that's why this impeachment is going nowhere, in my estimation. But for more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by John Solomon, who's an award-winning investigative journalist and the executive VP at The Hill, thehill.com. John, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Oh, glad to be with you guys.
So I want to go to this report that you did, investigative story you did prior to Mueller's hearing yesterday, and it was sort of referenced. It might have been Jim Jordan, but somebody I know referenced Weissman and a Ukrainian oligarch. He's referencing your story. This is the story of Andrew Weissman, who we know did the hiring and firing on Mueller's team. Andrew Weissman, who after the Mueller performance yesterday, yeah, right. I mean, we'll get into Andrew Weissman's career, but after the Mueller performance yesterday, it seems like, Weissman was really the lead special prosecutor here. And you have sort of a remarkable story about Andrew Weissman's dealings or attempted dealings with a Ukrainian oligarch named Dmitry Firtash. And I want you to provide the details of that.
Sure, I'm glad to do that. So it is just a few days into the Mueller investigation. It's June 2017, and Andrew Weissman, one of the more famously aggressive prosecutors in the history of the Justice Department, just named as Mueller's deputy, does what a lot of people say is a Hail Mary. He throws a Hail Mary. And the reason it's a Hail Mary is we all in the public, if you were watching CNN at that time, thought that the Justice Department had the goods on Donald Trump. But inside the Justice Department, Mueller's team was being briefed on how the Steele dossier was falling apart and that a lot of the main assumptions of the investigation were crumbling beneath him. So he looks for a Hail Mary, and what he does is he reaches out to an oligarch by the name of Dmitry Firtash, who's been indicted by the Justice Department since 2014. He's a Ukrainian with a lot of Russian contacts, and he basically tells Firtash's lawyers, listen, if you guys give up something on Donald Trump, I can make your criminal charges go away. And it is a remarkable moment for several reasons. One, it's 4 or 5 days into the investigation. They're not even read in yet. They're not in a position to make an educated plea bargain. Two, Weissman makes some remarkable boasts if the contemporaneous memos are accurate. He says no one in the Justice Department, not the Attorney General, not the DOJ, not the Chicago U.S. Attorney who brought this case, can stop me from doing this. That's not true. Bob Mueller's team had to answer to the Justice Department. They didn't have omnipotent power. And then I think three, and most interesting, is he spends a lot of time with the oligarch's lawyers, coaching them, telling them what the theories of Mueller were, the private evidence and private theories, almost trying to suggest what sort of testimony Firtash could give to get off the hook. And it really jarred Firtash's lawyers. And now, 3 years later, Weissman's conduct is about to become a major focus of the extradition process. This oligarch has been fighting extradition to the United States, to your town, Chicago. And in fact, now the appellate process in Austria is looking at Andrew Weissman's conduct and whether it is violative and possibly evidence of a political prosecution.
We're very criminal friendly here,
right,
so we'll welcome Dmitry Firtash.
But what Weissman did was illegal, correct?
Well, listen, I'll leave it to others. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not read in the law. I think what I can tell you is the lawyers listening to it were stunned by the behavior. Of course, they took the offer because, hey, if you can get your client off, you can get your client off. But at the end of the day, Mr. Firtash was unwilling to make up a story just to get out of the charges there in Chicago. And so I think that's a very important thing here, which is that the oligarch didn't take the bait. And it's a really remarkable story. I think as we look back, we're going to see that in that summer of 17, when we in the media, or not me, but many in the media were reporting this hysterical story, that behind the scenes, the Justice Department was watching its case fall apart. The collusion was falling apart behind the scenes.
Well, two things. One is Weissman's boasts that he didn't need anybody's permission to cut this deal, and you suggest, well, he had a report to the Department of Justice. That may speak to how significant he thought the oversight of the Department of Justice, Rod Rosenstein, was with respect to their operation. So that's sort of an interesting, perhaps implicit comment. In addition to that, now I want to connect the dot. Ukrainian oligarch, why would he have information on President Trump that could be useful to Weissman in the investigation? And the connector was Paul Manafort, right? It was Paul Manafort, business dealings over there. Give us Paul Manafort and what he told you, things like this, and that gets us to Trump.
Yeah, I mean, there are other things, too. Because of Firtash's contacts in Russia, they thought he might be able to prove that Russia was involved in collusion. They asked him about Jared Kushner and any business deals that he might have been aware of there. They were fishing around for anything this guy could have on anything Team Trump, from Manafort to the president to Jared Kushner to anybody in between, Oleg Deripaska, another oligarch who kind of shows up in the investigation fleetingly. It was a wide-ranging fishing expedition by Andrew Weissman. And what's remarkable is how much he shared about the inner thinking of the Mueller case. It's just something that doesn't normally go on in these type of discussions.
And is there any indication, because it seems like, this is per your report, that the Department of Justice had a problem in both cases. They had a problem with this prosecution of Firtash, not just his extradition, but in terms of the case in chief against him, as well as, obviously, the problem coming up with something to hang Trump on.
Very important point. Weissman might have been trying to solve two problems: throw the Hail Mary on Donald Trump, and also make what was becoming behind the scenes apparent a troubled case go away in the Justice Department. Two of the key prosecution witnesses that the government cited in their extradition request to get Firtash back to the United States have recanted. And there's a key piece of evidence, the main piece of evidence that supports this allegation that Firtash was considering bribery. It turns out they said it had come from Firtash's corporate files. In fact, it had come from an American consultant's files from another company, not Firtash's, and that company had told the FBI this was a hypothetical. We had no knowledge of a bribery scheme. Yet for 5 years in the United States Justice Department, the U.S. Attorney in Chicago has allowed that document to exist in the Austrian courts, misleading the Austrians about the nature of their evidence. And I think that was another part of this case that Weissman might have been trying to clean up behind the scenes.
I know this is inside baseball, but it's really fascinating. What's Misfud? Am I pronouncing
Joseph
it?
Misfud.
Joseph Misfud. What is his
Joseph
relation with George Papadopoulos?
Well, if you read the Mueller report, Joseph Mifsud is the start of the Russian collusion narrative. It is his contact on March 14th, 2016, with George Papadopoulos in Europe, in which they have a discussion about alleged emails, Hillary Clinton emails that the Russians have, that starts the entire investigation. It's what the FBI said it opened up on, the criminal investigation. There's an interesting and very fast-moving development here in Washington. The Justice Department review of Mueller's review, the one being done by John Durham, the U.S. Attorney from Connecticut, is looking at whether Mueller got Joseph Mifsud wrong. So the current portrayal in the Mueller report is that Mifsud was a Russian-connected guy who was trying to help the Trump campaign connect to Russia and maybe collude with the election. His lawyer, Mifsud's lawyer, told me in an interview that they got it wrong, that my guy, Mifsud, the lawyer speaking, was a longtime Western intelligence collaborator who was tasked specifically to approach Papadopoulos and then connect him to Russia to see what would happen. In other words, it might have been a setup. It might have been an intelligence op, private or government. The fact that John Durham's lawyers have reached out and are seeking to interview him tells you that at least that part of Mueller's report, the Justice Department is not satisfied with the answers, and that could be a very significant development.
And that would be consistent with what Jim Jordan mentioned in his exchange with Mueller yesterday, running Mifsud at him, running Halper at him, running this femme fatale at him to try and get him to, ultimately, I guess, say what he said to the Australian diplomat. But with respect to Mifsud, the other piece of this, and this was, again, part of that exchange, in Mueller's own report, Mifsud is described as lying to the FBI no fewer than 3 times, and he gets a pass on being charged with lying to the FBI, where Papadopoulos and Flynn and others did not.
Yeah, the man who starts the investigation is accused of lying but doesn't get charged, but everybody else does. And that was the point that both Devin Nunes and Jim Jordan made very, very powerfully yesterday. I think yesterday there was also a major revelation by Mueller at the hearing. I don't think any of the media have picked up on it. But if you go back and look at the questioning with Matt Gaetz, this could be one of the more significant acknowledgments in the hearing yesterday. During that questioning, Mueller acknowledged that the Justice Department is currently investigating the possibility that the Russians used Christopher Steele and his dossier to influence the election against Donald Trump. And if you just consider that, if that gets to be corroborated, that becomes the conclusion, it will mean that the Russia collusion investigation flipped on its head. Instead of Trump trying to influence, Russia trying to influence the election for Trump, Clinton and Steele were being used by the Russians to influence the election against Donald Trump. That would be a remarkable head slip in this investigation. And Mueller was very willing to offer that up as part of his testimony. A lot of people didn't pay attention to the significance of that. That could be a bombshell if that turns out to be true.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what else will happen if that turns out to be true is that Kimberly Strauss over at the Wall Street Journal is going to be forever known thereafter as the Cassandra of the Beltway, because that's exactly what she wrote. I mean, this was in 2017, maybe even early 2017. What if we've got this entire investigation wrong? What if the whole thing is flipped on its head and we're looking at 2016 through exactly the wrong prism? And she was essentially making the argument that you just made in terms of its possibility. So interesting stuff. Excellent point. John Solomon, award-winning investigative journalist and executive vice president at The Hill, thehill.com. Make sure to check out his piece on the Andrew Weissman and the Ukrainian oligarch. I'll tweet it out as well. John, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys. Have a good day.
Take care.
Yep, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. On AM